right, welcome to Fantasyland with Full Strokes Books today. Today I am talking with Jesse Thoma, Lesley Davis, and Renee Roman. Piper Jordan will be reading from a video a little bit later today. And today's Fantasyland panel is a scene highlighting characters' fantasies or a fantasy setting. We should have time for a Q&A at the end of the session. I'll be asking each of our panelists a question as we go along. And we're going to get started here in just a moment. So we're starting today with, I'm really sorry, I've lost track of who I said was going first, Jesse Thoma. And Jesse Thoma lives in New England with her family. She's loved superheroes since before they were cool. Hero Complex is her 8th novel, and it's the first where anyone has superheroes. Jesse, if you want to talk to us a little bit more about your book, and then whenever you're ready to start reading, please go ahead.
All right, so this is a Hero Complex, and as Charlotte said, it's the first book that I've written where anyone has superpowers. I have loved superheroes before Marvel made them cool, at least the movies. And so I'm going to read a scene where there's some action, where there are 4 characters in this scene. One of them is Bronte, who has just been woken up from being sort of in a medically induced coma for a year after injecting herself with some science that she created, and that has given her powers. And she doesn't know that she has been in this coma for this long, so she's woken up into this completely new environment. And then the other 3 characters, there's Athena, who is her love interest and a nurse, and is very sympathetic to her situation. There's Galen, who is the doctor at this facility where she is. And then there's Spiro, who is another patient. And Galen and Spiro also have powers. Spiro has a computer on his face, and he can manipulate emotions. And Galen is an empath and can feel others' emotions. Her powers don't come into play in this scene as much, but just so that you know that that's sort of the setting of the scene as we get started. There was a loud bang on the door. Everyone jumped. Bronte moved to the window to see what made the racket, but Galen stopped her. "Don't get close to the windows. We need to leave immediately." "Athena, do you have everything you need to grab?" Bronte walked to Athena's side and squatted next to her. "I'm not going with you. Tie me up if you think that will help make it look like I didn't have a choice about you leaving, but there are other patients on this floor. This is my job." Athena glared at Galen. Bronte thought there was regret in Athena's eyes. She really didn't want to stay. "I'm not sticking around once the basilisks attack, and there are things about the patients here you don't understand. If they wake up, we're in a world of shit." Galen moved to the window again and peeked out. Bronte joined her. The creatures the others had called basilisks were swarming. They looked like ants after an insult was introduced to the nest. "They're tired of waiting us out. They're going to come in and get you, Bronte. You and Spiro." Galen's face was strained and pale. "I imagine they won't be kind to you or Athena either." Galen nodded. "Probably less kind to Athena. They can buy another nurse, but they can't let go of one who has seen all this." "Are those things susceptible to his brand of chaos?" Bronte looked at Galen and Athena and pointed to Spiro. Athena moved to their side. It looked like her curiosity had gotten the better of her. "Yes, I think they're terrified of him. But as I said, I'm not going with you." "Time for you to suit up, Doc." Galen waved her hand toward Bronte from her head to her feet. Bronte took a step back. "You can't possibly mean my metal skin. I don't know how to produce it on command." Galen punched Bronte in the arm. "Son of a bitch." She shook her hand and mumbled another curse under her breath. "When we get out of here, we're going to have to do something about you finding that on-off switch. I'm not going to keep punching your metal ass to turn you into a superhero every time we need you." "I'm not a superhero." Bronte ground her teeth. There was another loud bang against the door. The window shattered. The first basilisk, neon yellow and more grotesque up close, pushed through the broken window, arms first. It was quickly followed by 2 more. The first basilisk latched onto Bronte's arm. It clawed its way up, silent, relentless. She swung her arm and flung it back to its kind like a bag of feathers. More surged through the window. Bronte punched 2. They flew from her metal fists. She'd never punched anyone before. She fought the urge to apologize. She turned to check on Athena in time to see her kick a basilisk between the legs. He fell to the floor with a groan. Then she dispatched another with an IV pole. Why had Bronte been so worried about protecting the goddess of war? Bronte pulled Athena after her to the door. Come on, let's get out of here. I'll clear a path. The foursome fought their way to the stairs. Bronte led. There was nothing the basilisk could do to stop her. Spiro brought up the rear. Bronte could hear cries of terror and rage, peals of laughter, and breath-snatching sobs. He was creating a symphony of emotional weight behind them. They were out of breath when they burst into the stairwell. Why aren't they trying to overtake us? Bronte spared a glance behind her and nearly missed a step. They can't risk being seen up here. Galen was panting but didn't slow. We're off the restricted floors now. Once we get to the main lobby, they can't follow us. They have strict orders. Don't let your guard down, though. They don't want us getting there. There was only one flight of stairs remaining. As the basilisk rose rapidly, Bronte yanked the door open, and she and the others spilled into the startlingly well-lit and cheerful hospital lobby. Their sudden appearance gave everyone pause, but most continued on their business quickly, averting their eyes. Galen pointed to the door. I'm not leaving. Athena leaned closer to Bronte. I don't think it would be wise for you to be here when upper management realizes we've escaped, and you were kicking those creatures in the balls to facilitate it. Bronte gently put her hand around Athena's bicep and led her after Galen and Spiro toward the exit. And Galen's right. With what you've seen, you're a liability now. You're not safe. Fine, but after we're out of the building, I'm going home. Athena pulled her arm free. There was a loud crack, an eerie silence, and then an explosion. Bronte felt like she was trying to stand still on the sands of an hourglass. The shockwave blew all four of them from their feet. As she fell backward, Bronte heard the tinkling of shattered glass hitting pavement and screams of pain and fear. Bronte got to her knees. She tried to stand but was dizzy. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the ground to steady herself. In the smoke and chaos, she couldn't tell what had caused the explosion or where it had come from. Where was Athena? Bronte saw her a few feet away. She wasn't moving. Bronte shook off the dizziness and moved to Athena's side. She checked for signs of life. Athena was breathing. She wasn't obviously bleeding or broken. Bronte leaned closer. If I play dead, will you leave me here? Athena kept her eyes closed and winced. No, I will not. Bronte scooped Athena in her arms. Spiro waved them over to an idling cab and hopped behind the wheel. Galen jogged over and got in the passenger seat. Bronte looked at Athena. She closed her eyes again and snuggled into Bronte. Bronte's chest seized. Was she more injured than she thought? Galen was a doctor. She lowered Athena gently into the cab and sat next to her. She'd barely gotten the door closed before Spiro accelerated away from the hospital, violating nearly every driving law Bronte could recall. Whether they died now in a fiery crash or made it to whatever destination Spiro had in mind, the escape had been worth it. None of them were in the hands of the basilisks, and Bronte had a chance to retrieve her research. That was her first and last priority. Once she did that, maybe she could figure out how to remove the Zeptobots and become herself again. Hopefully, she could still remember who that was. Thanks.
I love an action scene. So I take it because you're writing about superheroes, you're really into superheroes. Is that kind of what influenced you to write this?
Yeah, I mean, I've loved them since I was a kid. I think it's fun to think of the escape and, what could be. I love the characters who sort of stand for something greater than themselves or what could be in the world and kind of work to make that true. Those are the ones that have always kind of drawn my interest.
How would you describe your fantasy setting? Is it just that there's some people with superheroes? Is there other parts of the world that are different?
No, so it's definitely sort of a modern setting, except some people have these gained superpowers. With Bronte, it's very obvious how she got them. And then throughout the book, you kind of learn how Spiro got his as well. Galen's are not as well defined. She was born with them. She doesn't know how they came to be. And then whether there's others or not is not laid out in this one. It's something that I kind of like to think about. Are there other people? Since Galen was born with them, it makes sense that there might be others, but some were definitely sort of forced upon a couple of the characters.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jessie. We appreciate it. All right. And next up is Renee Roman, lives in arguably upstate New York with her fur baby, Maisie. She's passionate about living an adventurous life, exploring her authentic self, and writing. She'll be reading from her new novel, Desires Unleashed.
So this is my February release, Desires Unleashed. And that's what I'll be reading today. It is an erotic BDSM romance featuring Taylor Simpson, a business owner and dominant in every sense of the word, and Kel Murphy, an operations manager at a resort who is looking for relief from always having to be in charge. Kel has taken on a second job at a local pub where she meets Taylor, a patron who shows up every week at the same time. And this scene is Kel reflecting on the mysterious woman. Very late, and I was tired. The girls had badgered me into going for a nightcap, which turned into 2. Apparently, they weren't in any hurry to get home to their precious children and inattentive husbands after all. I had no such aversion to being home, wanting nothing more than a hot shower before crawling into my ridiculously comfortable bed, where I gave in to fatigue. The sharing of the antics my friends went through gave me an opportunity to re-examine the intricacies of their relationships and how they played out in their lives. Sadness enveloped me. My ex, Brenda, and I had never had that type of a relationship, and why, after all this time, thoughts of our failure to find a rhythm still haunted me and brought with it an even sadder weight that lay heavy on my heart. Maybe I wasn't relationship material, too stuck in my ways and in my own head to meet someone halfway. My siblings had always found the key to manipulating our parents, who usually gave in to their whims, but I had to fight for every victory, and they weren't always sweet. My parental relationship had been a battle of wills, too. Would I ever be able to relinquish the control I'd honed to another person? Even the idea of letting someone else take the reins sent a not too pleasant shiver through me. Whomever she was, she would have to be exceptional. Someone who understood what I needed to survive while winning my heart. I pounded my pillow into submission out of frustration before finally settling, though my thoughts continued to swirl, grasping at imaginary images of a future mate. The wash of exhaustion, relentless as ocean waves, soon overtook me, and the final picture that floated through my mind was of a woman who already knew me, though she hardly knew me at all, nor I her. The last thing I remembered before the darkness of sleep came was how ridiculous it was to be thinking of Taylor. A week. That's how long it had been since I'd seen Cal. The same night the kink scene I'd later orchestrated took a turn I'd been helpless to control, and that wasn't what I let happen as a dom. My play partner hadn't expressed much in the way of boundaries, and it was a good thing, too, because I'd lost my mind for a few moments there. Couldn't remember the last time that had happened, and I didn't want to repeat tonight. At a temporary standstill with work for who knew how long, the vision of Kel returned and gave me a reason to reconsider stopping at the waterhole before tonight's trip to the Play Palace. It was a routine I'd established almost a year ago as my centering point. Now there was a new factor, and Kel wouldn't be as easy to handle as other parts of the string of events that served as a warm-up for play scenes. No matter what happened with Kel, I would be the one to dictate if, or when, or how. In my life and DS relationships, submissive wasn't who I was, and I was as certain of that as I was that Kel had no idea how much she wanted to be mine. Only time would tell if she'd dare to follow me. Kel glanced at the door when I entered, and her back stiffened. The note I'd left was meant to stir her curiosity. After settling into my usual stool, I made eye contact and waited for Kel's response. She took a breath and approached, her shoulders tense and her smile reserved. Being tentative was a trait of a novice sub, and my center stirred. Hi, what can I get you? Kel wiped the already gleaming bar. Aracini and something smoky to drink. I was about to open a proverbial door, but Kel had no way of knowing the implications. What do you recommend? I've got just the thing. Kel called the food order in as she pulled bottles from the shelf behind her. Her pleasure at the finished product showed in the gleam in her eyes as she set the drink on a napkin and smiled. There you go. One smoky drink. Hands on hips, she stood waiting for me to try it. I leaned close and inhaled. The hint of cinnamon was there, and so was lime. The cloudy, muted yellow color wasn't much help. I brought it closer, wanting to sharpen my sense of smell before it hit my lips. I emptied my lungs, closed my eyes, and slowly took in a full, deep breath. Tequila, not the cheap stuff either. This drink was refined. When I opened my eyes, Kel stared in anticipation. I sat back, content to wait for my food before tasting the concoction. Kel's hands dropped to her sides. The kitchen bell rang. She threw her hands in the air and turned on her heel. Patience was a sign of a masterful dom, and I'd been one long enough to be content, knowing the anticipation was likely driving Kel a little crazy. Whether she was aware of it or not, that would heighten her senses. And the payoff? A new appreciation for not being the one in charge. It might have been her bar, her drink choice, and her skill that made it, but it was my choice to drink it, or not. She rounded the corner and set the dish down a little harder than necessary. Are you going to taste it or what? I unrolled the napkin, placed the silverware in the pattern I preferred, then draped the material over my lap. I'll pay for it whether I drink it or not. Kel's eyes narrowed. Do you want something different? Why would I want something else when I haven't tasted this one? God, you're infuriating. And you're impatient, I said, as I cut one rice ball into quarters. Why do you have such a need to control things? Her mouth opened and closed. I don't have to control anything, she said indignantly. Really? I asked. That's not the vibe you give off at all. I picked up the tumbler, wrapped my lips over the cinnamon sugar, and was hit by spice before the smoky tart flavors of the beverage coated my tongue. It was sharp and smooth at the same time. It was interesting and delightful. It's wonderful. Thank you. Silence ensued. Kel stared at me for a long stretch as I slowly ate and sipped, enjoying the quiet between us, while I envisioned the soft moans that would come from being buried inside her, or the sharp gasps Kel would make as I slapped her flesh. Kel came closer. What did you mean by that note you left? You will have to share yourself with me in order to trust me. Her gaze flicked from my eyes to my mouth and back again. I don't usually trust people, even if I know them. Why? Kel looked uncomfortable. Because it takes vulnerability to trust. That type of fear came from a deep pain, the kind that forced a person like Kel to take control of situations in order to keep her world on even ground. It was also the kind of pain that she longed to let go of, though she didn't know how. How will you learn to trust me if you don't show me your underbelly? You'll judge me. I could, but what if I don't? I could see her mind working, playing out the possibilities, though I had to question, why Kel? Why was I about to do something so uncharacteristic that I hesitated? Something else I hadn't done since I was a teenager. Go out with me. Let me show you a world where no one is judged. I thought she was going to say yes before the front door opened and a small group of mid-30s flowed in. Once they had their beers, Kel stood a little ways away from me. I finished my drink. Do you want another? She asked as she looked everywhere but at me. No. She whipped around, punched buttons, and produced a slip of paper similar to the one I'd written a note on last week. Was it only last week? It felt much longer. She placed it on the bar and she picked up the glass. Whenever you're ready. Are you trying to get rid of me? No, I'm being attentive. Kel's face told a different story, a mixture of annoyed and curious. It was something I wanted to see more of. What's your answer? Kel's head tilted and her eyes narrowed. To what? Accepting my invitation. I pulled my credit card from my pocket along with a $20 bill. I don't think I should. The hesitation in her voice was contrary to her words as she slid the print out to me. I wanted to go. She wanted to go, but she also wanted me to beg. I signed, then stood. Have a good evening, Cal. I wanted to give her another chance to answer differently, and it was so much out of character in how I handled a submissive. I almost did just that, but I didn't believe Cal wanted me to. She was used to getting her way with people in her life, but I wasn't one of them. She couldn't control how I responded, and she liked it. As I drove to the private club, my mind returned to Cal and the things I could do with her. A pleasurable fantasy for sure, and I'd glean as much as I could out of it. The one thing that was missing in my life was a full-time submissive to share it with. Why did I want to know if Kel was the one? Thank you.
Wow, you could feel the heat there. If you were just watching them, it might just kind of look like an interaction, but you really captured the sexual tension there very well. So smoky is the drink. So just a quick question. In what ways does fantasy influence your main characters? I think we saw a little bit of that just in that reading.
Part of it is that the BDSM community plays out real life desires and wants and needs. And that is where Taylor lives. And she has been recently looking for someone to fill that on a full-time basis rather than a temporary one. That's her fantasy, is to find a real life submissive. And Cal unknowingly is looking for someone to take over that control that she's so sick of having in her regular everyday life. So both of them have fantasies that they're looking to fulfill.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much, Renee. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, I'm back to Lesley, I hope.
This is still from Playing Love's Refrain, and this is literally the start of the book. Now, this is your first chapter, a part of it. Drew Dawes loved the smell of new comic books. A delivery had arrived, and like a child at Christmas, Drew was poring over each new box with barely restrained excitement. She found the treasure she was looking for when she opened the last box. She ran her fingers reverently over the latest Doctor Who comic book. She quickly laid one aside for herself, then placed the rest on the shelf, showcasing the new arrivals. It didn't take long for her to have everything displayed and the boxes ready for recycling. Drew checked her watch. It was nearly time for opening. She cast an exacting gaze around her store. Rows of comic books filled a sizable portion of the store floor. Glass cases lined the walls, housing expensive statues of superheroes and fantasy characters. Highly collectible Funko Pops took up a whole wall of their own. Posters decorated the entire store. Captain America stood alongside Black Panther, Captain Marvel with Wonder Woman, and Black Widow beside the garishly visaged Harley Quinn. Spaceships and a large Superman in flight hung from the ceiling. The combined power on display gave Drew comfort and a sense of peace. This store was her dream, her safe place, her life. Every morning she had the same routine in preparation for receiving her steady stream of customers. Others, like her, who were fascinated by the stories told in the comic books and graphic novels that line the shelves. Ones who loved the worlds of science fiction, fantasy, and the fantastic heroes and heroines who inhabited those worlds. Drew ate, slept, and breathed the worlds of fantasy. She had long acknowledged they played a large part in keeping her sane. Is this music from that Michelle Pfeiffer movie you love so much? The one where she's just a young thing and that skinny guy from Blade Runner is with her? Drew looked over at the counter where her grandma, May Dawes, stood, head cocked, as she listened to the strains of the Lady Hawk soundtrack playing softly through the speakers. Yes, Grandma, the one where she's a hawk and he's a wolf, because an evil priest has cursed them never to be together. You're such a romantic. Drew gave her grandma a rueful smile. Sadly, it's not a trait I've had much use for. Well, you just need to step outside this store more often. You can't expect the love of your life to come walking through that door to find you, especially as the majority of your customers are teenage boys, which has never been your thing. Her grandma chuckled to herself. But like I was saying, sometimes you have to take that first step and put yourself out there. Drew straightened a comic book in its place. She'd heard this conversation 1,000,000 times. I don't have the time. This store won't run itself. Just one night a week then. One night when you go out and show the world how cool you are. Drew bit back a grin at the word cool. That was the last thing she'd ever be. You need to get out and dance a little, flirt a little, romance the ladies and find your dream girl. Drew narrowed her eyes as her grandma as she started rummaging under the counter. The music stopped abruptly. Grandma, she warned her. Don't make me have to bring out the big guns. Her grandma grinned as she held a CD up as if it were a lethal weapon. Don't you dare. Drew regretted the day she'd shown her grandma how to work the stereo equipment for the store. Oh, my goodness, this disc just popped out of the player. I guess I need to put it back in, her grandma said, her innocent tone ruined by a wicked grin she did little to disguise. Drew braced herself for what was coming. Her grandma had little regard for routine and structure. She loved spontaneity and loud music. Drew closed her eyes in defeat as the familiar intro to a boisterous pop song began. God damn it, Grandma. Can I have that damn song in my head all day now? Drew whined as the joyous strains of Olivia Newton-John singing Xanadu pounded out around the store. There's nothing like a bit of Olivia to start your day off right. Her grandma busted out a little shimmy as best she could while holding herself up with her ever-present walking stick. She sang along with Olivia for a while, blew Drew a kiss, then ambled out to go back to the apartment they lived in above the store. The sounds of Xanadu drowned out the sound of the stair lift taking her grandma back upstairs. This was her grandma's favourite song from her favourite movie. Drew had watched it with her as a child more times than she could remember. It was a movie with a positive message, a rarity in the cinematic world. The movie suited her grandma to a T, especially the theme song. It was loud, boisterous, colourful, and hard to forget. It was an anthem, a call to believers to take the hand of their muse and follow their dreams. Drew wandered back to the stereo as the song played out its glorious conclusion in a mass of synthesizer strings and the unmatchable sweet voice of Olivia. Shaking her head, Drew carefully put the CD back in its case and tried to hide it again behind the stack of CDs that were under the desk. She knew her grandma would still find it. Drew slipped in a new CD to play. She cast one last look around the store, satisfying herself everything was in place, and only then did she look outside. There was already a line forming of her regular customers. New comic book day was the best day ever. She opened the door to usher them in. Greetings, fellow geeks. Welcome to Doors and Destiny Comics. Thank you.
I love a comic book store. We've got a great one here in town, and I could just picture exactly what you were talking about. And I think those of us that like those kind of shops are like, it's like coming home sometimes. And
It's the closest thing to heaven on earth.
Yeah. So your kind of fantasies is a little bit different than Renee's, and a little bit different than Jesse's as well. But I think this question could still apply. Thinking about the way that someone that works and runs a comic book store is, how does that influence that character or any of the other characters? Just having that as sort of the center of their lives is fantasy sci-fi.
What I wanted for Drew was that everything that as she was growing up, there's another part of her story where she was given a career choice that she didn't want as a child, and this was her choice of what she wanted to do. So all the fantasy that she grew up with being allowed to suddenly have comic books, to watch the movies that gave her heroes and heroines, she could then put it into the job that she wanted, which was to be constantly surrounded by all those things. It becomes a safe place, and it's her safe place, and the ones that go in are the ones that are like-minded.
Yeah, you do find a kind of community in that kind of store for sure. Well, thank you so much, Lesley.
Thank you.
So Piper Jordan grew up in the Midwest, but soon transplanted to warmer temperatures of southern Arizona. She enjoys sunset hikes, traveling, and spending time with family and friends. Piper also writes sweet romance stories as author Tony Logan.
Hi, I'm Piper Jordan, and today I'll be reading from my book, Hotel Fantasy, which is an erotica romance that's about a private Las Vegas resort where every room in the hotel has its own theme. The swish of the front doors opening and the clicking of heels on the marble tile commanded my attention. I looked up, and my stomach tightened as a flush of heat spread through my body. The woman sauntering towards me while wheeling a small suitcase behind her had on a dark, skin-tight skirt that hugged long, lean legs and an equally tight sheer turtleneck. Her brunette hair was wrapped perfectly on top of her head, and oversized black glasses framed her thin, sculpted face. She could have easily graced the cover of any fashion magazine. "Hi, sorry I'm late. My flight was delayed," she said in a voice that was low and sultry. Molly Taylor," I interrupted as I stared at this goddess of a woman, this amazing specimen who in the 30 seconds she'd taken to walk across the lobby had my mind darting between at least 3 fantasies I'd love to act out with her. "Yes," I cleared my throat. "We've been expecting you. We have you scheduled for Suite 6 for 2 nights. Our eyes met and locked. "If there's anything you need during your stay, please don't hesitate to let us know." "I do have one request." "Oh," I arched a brow. "But it's something only your manager, Lesley Williams, can accommodate." My knees buckled a bit as I heard my name spoken through her beautifully full lips. What could this woman possibly want that only I could deliver? "I'm Lesley," I announced, hopefully not betraying my thoughts. I watched her take a moment to roll her eyes over me as the ends of her mouth curled up and she ever so subtly bit her lip. "Lesley," she said and extended her hand. "Nice to finally meet you." "Finally?" I cocked my head at the interesting word choice and reached for her hand. Usually guests referenced the resort using that word as they gushed about how nice it was to finally be here. Never had any of our clientele used it while referencing me. "Nice to meet you too. Now, what can I do for you?" I wrapped my fingers around hers and a jolt shot through me, pinging every receptor in my body. "I would like to request a certain deck of playing cards." I trained my focus back to the computer as I pulled up the screen that displayed her orders and rescanned the list of items. A deck of playing cards was definitely not among them. "My apologies, Miss Taylor. It seems as though I can't accommodate your request. We normally don't have playing cards on the property unless a guest specifies ahead of time that they'd like to incorporate them as part of their fantasy play. But if you'd give me a few minutes, I'll have a staff member pick up a deck and deliver it to your suite," I said as I reached for the phone. "Actually," Molly trailed off as she dug into the large Gucci bag on her shoulder and cupped what looked like a single playing card. She placed it on the counter, covered it with her hand, and smiled as though she knew the answer to a million-dollar question. "I think this will clue you in as to the deck I'm referring to," she said as she retrieved her hand, revealing a laminated playing card. A lump hit my throat and my stomach bottomed out as I stared at the design on the back of the card. This can't be. How is it even possible? I reached with shaky hands and slowly turned the card over, knowing exactly what I would see and how the image would transport me back in time. "How did you get this?" I whispered as I stared at the face of the card, a watercolor image of my naked body intimately wrapped around another. The image was framed with a Q and a heart in opposite corners. "The Queen of Hearts," I muttered as I traced each brushstroke and remembered the incredible lovemaking that had ended in this exact embrace. "Do you still have the deck?" she asked in a breath that almost sounded desperate. I nodded without taking my eyes off the card. Of course I still had the deck. I'd placed it in my office as a memento of the 3-week whirlwind lovemaking ride I'd spent with the most amazing woman I'd ever been with, and every now and then I would get it out and study the cards. Each had a sensual position painted on the face, forever frozen at a moment in time when Shelley and I shared and discovered the many pleasures of each other. "Yes," the word came out in a long, drawn-out whisper. "I still have the deck." I finally looked up, leaving the card and my memories on the counter. "But I don't understand. How did you get this?" "I'll make a deal with you. I'll tell you the story as to how I acquired your Queen of Hearts over a game of cards." Her eyes were searching, daring me to accept. "But if you'd rather not," she said as I remained speechless and frozen. "That's okay. I understand." She placed her hand over the card and began sliding it back. It had been 5 years since I'd last seen that card. 5 years of wondering what had happened to it and what had become of Shelley. I tilted my gaze up and searched Molly's eyes. She had to know what she was doing. She had cast the hook perfectly, and now all she had to do was reel it in and watch me swim after it. Was I going to bite? Oh, hell yes, I was going to bite, and Molly Taylor knew I would. probably knew deep down that I needed to know the answers to my questions. I placed my hand over hers. Wait, the word came out more frantic than I wanted. The hook was now firmly embedded in my mouth. Amen, I said, as the smile on her face widened, and with it an expression that conveyed that she knew she had me. So that's a bit of hotel fantasy, and thanks so much for letting me share it.
I love the idea of a hotel that would be specialized. If I could get all three of our in-person people back, got a few minutes for questions anyway. And I'd like to invite anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question, but please do. You can do it in the Q&A or in the chat. And if you haven't seen the chat, there's also links to 3 of the books, and I'm sure the 4th book will pop up here by our authors. All right, well, thanks again, everybody. These are awesome readings. I think all of you chose really, seemed like scenes that really captured either a character or ideas about your book. So because I kind of mentioned this with Lesley, that there's kind of different kinds of fantasy with all 3 of you. I'm going to tailor these questions a little bit, but I think you can all answer this one, which is, why do you think fantasy is so important for you and or your characters? If you want to kind of turn it back to them, that is, in what ways does it enrich lives? And that could be real life or in fiction. And I'll start with Jessie.
Well, my fantasy is a little different than Renee or Piper's. But I think regardless of what kind of fantasy it is, I think it's a wonderful way to let you imagine a world that is not your own, or seek out a world that is not the one that you currently have. Whether you're, looking for a hotel that offers a fantasy that maybe isn't your real life, or whether you're wishing that you were a superhero and reading about it at a comic book store. I think that it's a safe way or a great way to kind of envision, something that is more than the current reality. And sometimes that's very important, I think, for people to have that to look toward. For comics, for me as a kid, it was always something that, I had these ideas of how the world should be or how I wish the world was, and it wasn't that way. And I could look to comic books and see that there were, these heroes that I could look up to who were striving to make the world a little bit more like I wanted it to be. And that was really powerful for me as a kid, to see that and to read that and to know that, there were people who were making these stories up that kind of were thinking about the world in the same way I was. And so that was something that was really powerful for me.
Yeah, great. Renee, how about you?
For Taylor, it is the dreams of the fantasies that she got to fulfill in real life. And for her, that was just an amazing discovery. And for me, the fantasies are scenarios that I craft for my characters. And I try to instill the emotions that are involved with those fantasies, and seeing them become real on the page. That's my job, and I love it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us that try and whether it's sexual fantasies or setting fantasies, try and think about ways that would influence our characters having different, either settings or fantasies like that. Lesley, why is it so important to you, your characters' fantasy?
Well, for me, I love fantasy anyway. I eat, sleep and breathe it as well. I love the escape that it gives. And it's been very intriguing watching how fantasies changed over the years. We have a photograph of me as a little tiny toddler in a Batman pinafore. And I don't know where the heck my mum got it from, but I blame her for starting me off, because since then everything has been fantasy. Usually I write books that are fantasy, like angels and demons or aliens. There's this is my romance ones, but there's always something decidedly geeky in them, whether they're a gamer or with this one, she runs a comic book store, because I just thought she needed somewhere to go that was better than what she'd had as her childhood growing up. So for Drew, having that escape, and for a lot of the people that I know that are drawn to fantasy, those things there's something that you always have around you. And there's something about it that it's a calming force. And also it's fun. It's a marvelous escape.
Yeah, I think and I'm sure Jesse might speak to this too. Yeah, that fantasy and comic books, maybe you find them at a time when you're young and you kind of glom onto it then, and for whatever reason, and then many of us grow up and it's still a big part of our life, even if it doesn't quite fulfill those same ideas that it did when we were younger. This is probably mostly for Lesley and Jesse, but I'll think about a way to kind of think about this for Renee as well. But so Jesse, what appeals to you or your characters about fantasy science fiction? You've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I know that in the introduction you sent me, and you said that this was the first book where your characters have superpowers. So what made you make the leap to having them actually do that?
Well, I mean, as with anything, you have to have the story and you have to have the characters. And I didn't before this. So that was the huge driving leap for that. And so, you have to, characters lead first, the story leads first. So I've wanted to do it for a long time, but I didn't want to do it until I knew that I had a story that could work with it. And now I feel like I've got hundreds of stories in my head that could work with it. So we'll see how many more of them make it onto the page.
Yeah, and Lesley, you were saying that you often, so similarly, you said that you're often actually set it in a fantasy setting. So why the shift to sort of having non-fantasy characters in a shop about fantasy, I guess.
My books are always romance, no matter what setting. This I class as my real world stories, but I am normally, my first book with bold strokes was Vigilantes in Masks. So kind of superheroes, only without the extra powers. I love that kind of world. I love the fact that the Winged series I did were angels and demons. My mind just goes off on a tangent. It's never going to always stay on something normal. That's just not me. But these, even though they are my real romances, they still have to have something geeky, and I've got no choice. It's what I know.
All right, so shifting that question a little bit, Renee, do many of your characters kind of function around this idea of fantasy, sexual fantasy is kind of ruling their lives, or did you feel like this was a departure in any way?
I dabbled in the BDSM world in Escorted, which was the female-run, female-centered escort service. And there was a lot of fantasies that were played out in that setting. But I thought that I became interested in the world of BDSM and did some in-depth research with some individuals in the community, and it was a fun project. So they actually get to live out their fantasies like often and every day, and I found that fascinating. And so, yeah, it was a departure in a way for me, although most of my books have quite a bit of steam in them, so that is not a departure.
Right.
That's kind of my running theme.
All right, we'll have two wrap-up questions. The first one for everybody. Do you consider yourself a daydreamer yourself? So kind of fantasy broadly. Are you now? What do you find yourself daydreaming about that you're willing to share? Jesse, how about you? What kind of
Yeah, I've always got a million things in my head. I kind of joke with people that I have a filing cabinet in my head that I kind of just like, oh, there's that one gets filed here. And my wife has said multiple times that the scariest thing I can ever say to her is, so I was thinking, because she never knows what's going to come out of my mouth, whether it's this is what I'd like for dinner, or I was thinking we should tear down the garage and build, a rocket launcher. There's just, it could absolutely be anything. So my mind is always off in the clouds.
I can see her sort of like freezing.
Yeah, that's the look exactly.
What?
Yeah.
Renee, how about you?
Mine is I'm nearing retirement age.
Right.
Fingers crossed. When I can write a lot more than I do right now. Having 2 30-40-hour-a-week jobs is kind of
Oh,
taxing.
goodness.
Because I do try to write between 30 and 40 hours a week. And that doesn't always happen. But yeah, that's my fantasy dream, is to write more and travel when I'm not writing or while I'm writing. It doesn't really matter. I like the idea of not having a 9-to-5 schedule. That's my fantasy.
That's the dream. That is the dream.
So I'm looking forward to that.
I bet. Well, good luck. Lesley, how about you?
Thank you.
I'm pretty much 24/7 fantasy surrounded. Don't actually have fantasies as such that involve me, but I've got a lot more stories that I want to get done. If I could just stop the voices going on that keep telling me their different tales as I get to start one. But there's always something going on. But I enjoy. I mean, I do a lot of gaming, which is something that keeps me occupied. So I love fantasy.
Like
It's just-
tabletop or video games?
No, PS games. So I'm normally on a PlayStation.
Okay.
We recently did one that was a Gotham Knights, which is your Batwoman and those kind, and that was great. I got to multiplayer with somebody, and we had so much fun playing characters that were so not like us.
Cool.
And that's one of the fun parts of it. You get to live out your fantasy, and through games was just an amazing way of doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even writing can sometimes get you a little bit of that too, I'm sure. So to wrap up, everyone, if you would like to talk about, if you've got an upcoming book or an upcoming project that you'd like to share with the group, what's coming up next, or if you want to talk a little bit more about this book, and we'll start with Renee.
I'm in a novella with Piper Jordan and Ronica Black. It's called Decadence. We share a common setting. It's a mansion in Las Vegas run by a woman who has invited people invitation only to a sex party. And we each write our own story within that setting, and it was a fun project, and we had a blast doing it. So that's next, and I have a proposal in the works. Hopefully I'll hear about that soon.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Lesley?
I've got an idea that's rattling around in my head, but it's getting it out onto paper I work with pen and paper first.
Oh wow.
So I've just got to do that. The voices are there. I'm hearing them.
It's coming. Okay.
Yes.
Jesse, how about you?
I have a upcoming release that is called The Town That Built Us. It's a second chance romance where a woman has stayed away from her hometown for years because her high school sweetheart broke her heart. But then her father dies and leaves his house jointly to her and her high school sweetheart. So she has to return to her hometown and deal with that inheritance and her complicated feelings for her ex-girlfriend. And then I also am writing a novel with Sia Frizzell, where we are writing a historical, half modern day romance called Guide Us Home that is takes place around lighthouses, and there's a lighthouse setting in both the modern and present day. So stay tuned for more about that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you all so very much. And thanks very much to our audience, panelists, Piper, and to Sandy, our handy dandy helper today. We've got another panel up at 6 p.m., which is Nice Work If You Can Get It. Authors will discuss their characters' professional lives. And that's with Dina Blake, Chris Bryant, Lesley Davis again, Christina Rivers, Karis Walsh, moderator, Kimberly Cooper Griffin. And thanks again to everyone, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.